limited as well. Let me go straight across to Zeba Warasi, who's joining us live. Zeba, this is a fairly detailed SOP that has now been put out. Do we have any date on when air travel can resume? And when we talk about social distancing, what does it mean? Does it mean that the aircraft will fly to only 60% of its capacity or 70% of its capacity?
Well, so far what we do know is that the process to resume domestic flight operations partially has begun. Certainly there are inspections that are being carried out at different airports by DGCA and ministry officials both, and airlines are also on standby. Now this particular SOP, which is very, very detailed, like you pointed out, Shreya, CNN NEWS18 has accessed this. This is the internal communication between the ministry and the various stakeholders in the industry. Airlines, airport operators have been given this SOP, and they've been asked to provide suggestions, questions, clarifications if they need by this week. So they will be responding to these set of rules that are being proposed by the ministry. Now, like you've pointed out, these rules are very, very detailed. Air travel, as we know it, is set to change post-lockdown. In a COVID-19 world. We will not be getting hot meals in an aircraft. We have to report at least 2 hours before departure. We will be wearing masks, gloves. All of that was known. But another interesting aspect is that the Arogya Setu app is mandatory for air travel, and if you are not in the green zone, if you're not in the green area, if the Arogya Setu app doesn't give you a green card per se on the app, as a result, you will not be allowed to enter the building. And that's not just for passengers, it's also for all airline staff, airport personnel, basically everyone who's supposed to enter the airport building. Now we've been speaking to airlines who are of course deliberating on this particular document. Many of them are also talking about what about passengers who don't have a smartphone, who perhaps don't have access to the Arogya Setu app? That is one question that is likely to be raised by airlines. What is the protocol to be followed? Interestingly, all passengers, as per this SOP, will be made to fill in a form by airlines where they have to declare their COVID-19 history, whether they were ever tested positive, whether they were ever quarantined as per contact tracing protocol. And these passengers will be taken to an isolated security check-in. Contactless boarding, contactless cash exchange. There's going to be no cash exchange in the initial phase, so all payments have to be made digitally. If you have an excess baggage, you will have to pay digitally, no exchange of cash. Now this is also another measure to reduce person-to-person contact inside the airport. No meals being served is another measure to reduce person-to-person contact. And people above 80 years of age will not be allowed to travel, at least in the initial phase, once flight operations resume. This is another point which is mentioned in this particular SOP. There are very, very strict guidelines for airports as well when it comes to sanitization. Social distancing marks are supposed to be placed so that people stand a certain distance apart at every queue that you're made to stand inside the airport. Even inside the aircraft, airlines are supposed to ensure this. So certainly very, very detailed, and if once this is implemented, once the airlines give the feedback, this is going to be the new norm, the new normal in air travel.
Okay. All right, Zeba, do stay on with us. Kapil Kaul is the CEO and Director for the Center of Aviation. He is joining us on the broadcast as well. Mr. Kaul, thank you very much for being part of the show. There's a detailed SOP that has now been put out for all air travel. I'm going to ask you if it's practical. I'm also going to ask you if something like social distancing makes sense for the aviation industry. For example, if all airlines are asked to keep the middle seat empty, does it make business sense for them?
Well, first of all, I think the post-lockdown protocol is on expected lines. I must confess that it looks very stringent and perhaps overcautious, but given the circumstances, rightly so, because focus is on health and safety. I didn't see the middle seat to be kept empty. I saw quarantine seats, 6 quarantine rows, 3 rows in the back to be kept for quarantine, but there is no middle seat to be kept empty unless until I have missed something. But I think the changes in the operational model for airlines and airport are on expected lines. Airlines and airports are geared up to that. Just an operational and execution part is left, but I think they are well aware what to do. They may need some more time to adhere to the new norms, but they are expecting that the norms will be stringent and they will have to comply to these norms till we get back to the pre-COVID days. It's the passengers that will need to get more accustomed to the new normal. As I said, airlines and airports are already accustomed. They will get more accustomed to it. passengers will need to be educated, and I don't know how that education and that information system will move to passengers about the new norm that they will have to comply with. But initially, I would think that there may be some challenges initially till the system settles to it. But eventually, this will become the new norm. So I'm quite hopeful that after a few weeks of the initial challenges, the system will cooperate with each other, whether it's the airlines and airports or passengers, because this is necessary. This has to be done. But it will just maybe take a few weeks to settle to the new system.
Given that there is a stringent SOP in place, given that I don't know how you social distance in a crowded place. I mean, for example, we are seeing pictures that are coming to us from railway stations. Rail services are becoming operational today. You're seeing the police try and do what it can do, but social distancing is simply not possible in a railway station. It's not happening at the New Delhi railway station. My question to you is this: do you see, at least in the first 2 weeks, passengers willing and wanting to travel given the risks involved despite the stringent SOP?
Well, the first thing for travel to resume is the containment zones in metros need to be lifted. If we have the metros, particularly Delhi, Bombay and Bangalore, with 80-90% into containment zones, in fact, most of the metros are in containment zones. So I think a revival for airlines or resumption for airlines is meaningless till Delhi, Bombay, at least is most of the containment zones are removed. Till we have most of the metros under containment zones or risk zones, it's impossible to look at a revival of a travel, because the travel is within metros and most of the non-metro travel is to metros. So if metros are locked in containment zones, it's unlikely and it's not logical to think that the resumption of airlines will happen.
All right, Mr. Kaul, thank you very much. Zeba, I'm coming back to you with that question itself. There was some talk, at least initially, about how flights will not ply from one red zone to another. But a bulk of the traffic that airlines carry are from cities which are in the red zone: Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, etc. Are you hearing anything on that front? I mean, if you just resume flights from green zone to green zone, that may not make any sense for airlines at all.
Certainly. So initially, when this talk started, when Minister of Civil Aviation in some interviews also said that perhaps in the initial phase we will look at flying from one green zone to another, because assessing the COVID-19 situation is going to be crucial if we are to really resume domestic flight operations. But the airlines were not very keen on only operating between green zones, because like you rightly pointed out, green zones at present in India are tier 2 and tier 3 cities, which do not really amount to a major bulk of air traffic, and hence they are not commercially viable. So sources within airlines tell CNN News 18 that they are very, very keen on operating through major metro cities, the main routes, that is Mumbai, Delhi, Bengaluru, Kolkata, Hyderabad, along with the green zones, along with the others, because they are the ones which are the most commercially viable if they are to operate. Even if domestic flight operations are resuming partially, these are the main zones where they really would like to start their operations, which is why sources tell CNN News 18 and that in the first phase we are also looking at longer haul flights which are more than 2 hours in duration. Now, more than 2 hours duration would usually include the longer distances, which is Mumbai to Delhi or Mumbai to Delhi to Bengaluru and so on. So perhaps these will be the destinations, but of course the absolute clarity on that we'll only get when the formal announcement is made or when the airlines are officially intimated by the Ministry of Civil Aviation.
Zeba, so you have a detailed SOP, but here's a quick question that everyone who possibly wants to get from place A to place B or is stranded in place A and needs to get to place B will be wanting to ask at this point of time. Whenever the flights reopen, we don't know when that happens, possibly it'll happen post the 17th. The question is this: if you're taking a flight from place A to place B, when you get to place B, your destination, do you need to quarantine or not? If you need to quarantine, where is this quarantine going to be? Is it home quarantine? Is it institutional quarantine? How many days is this quarantine going to be? Is it going to be 7 days or is it going to be 14 days? Is the Ministry of Civil Aviation going to give out those guidelines / SOPs as well, or will they let states decide on their own?
Well, that is very, very likely that there will be some guidelines that are going to come in from the Minister of Civil Aviation. For employees and staff of airlines and airport personnel, we have it in this particular SOP that if they show any symptoms, they are to be quarantined for 14 days. Depending on the symptoms, it's going to be decided whether it will be a home quarantine or whether it's going to be an institutional quarantine. The state governments will also have to weigh in on this. For passengers, now if you remember in the week in the run-up to the flight ban, when we were still operating domestic flight commercial flight operations, there were these guidelines that were issued. People were being stamped if you know, home quarantine, or you know, people who've just traveled from abroad, they were being stamped to ensure that these are the people who need to be in a home quarantine. So perhaps we will see something like that as well. There is most likely going to be some form of UV screening at most of the major airports once flight operations resume. So if anything is detected, if your symptoms are detected, you will be asked to quarantine yourself at home. And of course, if your symptoms are more severe, then you will have to be taken to an institutional quarantine. So that is very, very likely, and a thorough guideline in that regard is likely to be issued by the ministry and respective state governments once flight operations resume.
Okay, Zeba, do stay on with us. Let's get another voice in. Sudhakar Reddy is the president of the Air Passengers Association of India, APAI. He is joining us on the phone line as well. Mr. Reddy, I wonder whether you had a chance to see the detailed SOP that Zeba has managed to access about, you know, how people will fly, how things will pan out once air travel starts. This is a fairly stringent piece of document that has been put out. Do you think it's enough to keep passengers safe, or do you think it'll be an inconvenience at this point of time?
No, while most of them are necessary, there are some which we feel totally unnecessary, and you know, one should not make traveling by air is a very scary thing, you know, because all this home quarantine and all that. Nobody would like to go from here to another destination and then get stuck there and get admitted into hospital, and it should be made, you know, very simple and very passenger friendly. You know, you can introduce the mask, you can introduce the social distancing, you can do all that. There is absolutely no issue. What we are concerned with is passengers should not be allowed to carry any hand baggage, because that is absolutely necessary, because you don't know what each one is carrying and how many people will touch it, and, you know, in the process of putting inside the aircraft and taking it out and all. And second is, we feel water should not be served in a disposable cup, because then it is again, you know, the contact is more than one person. If they are going to have a tray with, you know, mini bottles, you know, 200 ml bottles, then it is, the passenger will take it, you know, on their own. And of course, the air hostess should be wearing, you know, PPE or even hand gloves.
Mr. Reddy, the concerns that you're raising have already... Mr. Reddy, the concerns that you're raising have already been addressed in this document that has been put out. There will be no meals on board, at least no hot meals on board. Your contact with your air hostess will be limited. I really doubt whether anyone will be serving any sort of beverage or water inside airplanes as of now, at least to begin with. And in the first phase, the document very clearly is saying that no hand baggage will be allowed. Mr. Reddy, thank you very much for joining us with your perspective. You're saying if the entire clause of quarantine comes in, that will be an inconvenience to passengers. We have yet to hear from about quarantine and whether you need to quarantine yourself after you've flown in from place A to place B. That is something that still needs clarity. Zeba, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much. You're getting us details to what flying is going to